Hi and welcome to this video where we're back on the Mini 1 and hopefully going to get the gearbox and clutch back in the car. Now I am going to use the old clutch because it appears to have a little bit of life still left in it, and if you drive sensibly it probably lasts for many miles. So I'm going to put the original clutch back in. I'm also going to put the clutch release bearing back in, and that may not be quite such a wise move, but hopefully it will be. And also I've been reading a lot about this grease on the splines and everything, and there seems to be a massive area on this about which grease you use, don't use everything else. So to avoid all the problems with that, I think Satchers know what they're doing, and so I've bought Satchers grease, which is specifically for the splines on the gearbox. So I'm going to go with that. Now, I did read somewhere that if you don't grease the release bearing tube, there is a risk that when you do put your foot on the clutch, the pressure can be like a sideways movement slightly and actually snap the tube off. So that may have been what's happened to this one. Perhaps the person who did the clutch in 2016 didn't grease the tube, and so as the bearing goes up it meets resistance and does a sideways sort of kick and snaps the tube off. So that's a possible as to why we've had this issue in the first place. So anyway, so that's basically what this video is about. It's basically get the clutch back on the car, get the gearbox back on, and hopefully if there's time get the engine mount on as well, and then it's just back to putting all the other bits back on and the subframe. So hopefully you'll enjoy this video, and as always thank you very much for watching. Okay, so I can pop my EVA mats down, which will make life a little bit more comfortable. And looking up EVA, it stands for ethylene vinyl acetate, and they certainly do make a hell of a difference to working underneath the car. And here's a photo of what I can see, and there's the locating dowels, the 3 of them in blue, and in red there's the flywheel bolts, which we haven't removed. So what we can do first is to clean the clutch parts using methylated spirits or a clutch cleaner, but never a petroleum based product. Right, so we've got our methylated spirits back out. Now I did actually clean these before, but since I was doing the Renault Laguna, they've been sat on the workbench now for a few weeks and could possibly have got recontaminated with oil or something like that. So it's worth just making sure they're all clean again before popping them back onto the car. And then I'm just going to wipe that off with a clean bit of towel, just to make sure there isn't any oil on there. So now I'm also going to clean the faces of the flywheel. So again, what I'm using is, it was a clean brush to start with. Definitely don't want an oily brush. So start with a clean brush there and get the old dust back off. Might be worth mentioning that you should have actually checked the flatness of the flywheel and checked it for any scoring or damage before putting the clutch back in. I am assuming everything's okay on that though. So anyway, so here's the tool I'll be using, which is the Laser 7812, and this one is for the G-Trag gearbox, because you have got another one for the Midlands on the earlier Minis. So basically this goes through like that, and it centres the diaphragm spring to the clutch plate. Now note that the clutch has got 2 sides to it. That is the flat side showing now, and the other side has got the protruding springs, which would actually go inside that diaphragm spring. I have just sort of popped it there so you can see clearly that it's protruding. If I showed the flat side it wouldn't be quite so obvious. So here's a close-up of that. I'll try and tilt it to one side as well to try and show the difference. So that's our diaphragm spring, and there's our centering tool, and that's how it goes in there and locates. and then bring the clutch up. So I'll see if I can show you this, the difference between the two sides. So there's the springs protruding at the bottom, and that's the orientation that it would sit on that diaphragm spring. So it should go on like that. So the thinner side is then facing the flywheel, like so. Yes, and it spins. Lot of fun. Right then, so this is now ready to go back on the car. Like so. Give it another spin. Now to fit the clutch back onto the flywheel of the engine using the new cover bolts and a Torx E8 driver. And note that there are 3 sizes of bolt. There's an M7, an M8 and an M9. So there's our clutch with our centering tool, so that's like a one-piece unit now, and you are supposed to use new E8 bolts for the diaphragm spring. So we should be able to lift this up. Now I'm going to put it into position with my previous marks because I'm reusing this clutch and spring. So there's my yellow mark there and there. So I'll line those two up, and then I can just push the whole unit onto the 3 dowels. Like so. And just tap that on there. And I'll just show you a photo of this so you can see the different size screws and my yellow mark, and there's the locating dowels. Now this is the order in which we need to tighten those 6 screws. Right then, so back underneath again and putting bolt number 1 in like so. So this is the sequence that you need to do it in, and you'd gradually tighten this down. So that's our bolt 2 in, bolt 3. So it's sort of like a crisscross pattern here. Bolt 4. There's our bolt 5. And then finally we pop in the last bolt 6. And then you would need to just gradually tighten those down bit by bit in the same order. Just checking there, the centering tool's all okay. That's all looking good. That's what it looks like when the tool's back out. So we just need to torque those up. So like I said, there's 3 different torque settings. I think mine are M7, so that would be 20 Newton meters. There's also 23 and 28 depending on the bolt size. So again, we'll start with bolt 1, then 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So that's now gradually being tightened. And then we can go for the final torquing. There's our click, there we go. Number 2. So you can do this without actually locking the flywheel, as long as you just push in the other direction. You should be able to hold it enough just to tighten those to the correct torque setting. Otherwise you'd have to perhaps put a toothed tool in just on the flywheel to try and lock it in place, like so. Okay, so that's the clutch back on the car. So now to greasing the clutch operating parts using Satch's high performance grease. So a little bit of advice from Satch's, and that is if the clutch hub spline isn't greased correctly, it can lead to fret and corrosion, which can cause the disc to seize instead of sliding along the input shaft of the gearbox. And before installing the clutch, check its lateral run out. This can only be 0.5mm maximum, as more than this can cause drag. And also be aware that grease must be temperature resistant and endure high surface loading. The wrong grease may melt, solidify, become resinous or burn, causing operation issues. So like I say, there is a lot of controversy over this part, which is why I've opted to use Satch's, because hopefully there's no question that this grease is the correct grease. Now what I have noticed with using it is it seems extremely tacky. It almost feels like it's got some sort of glue base to it, and it is extremely sticky. So presumably that's to stop the grease from flinging off and contaminating the clutch disc itself. So I've put a bit of grease basically on all the parts that have some movement, like so. So that's the release bearing going back in. And again, I'm just going to pop a bit of grease there, and that's where the slave cylinder pushes onto that bar. So that's all nicely greased up. Pop that on, and hopefully this is all going to give me some trouble-free driving. I'm also going to just put a bit of surface of the bearing, although that will probably wear off. Okay then, time to refit the gearbox back on, or rather, time to struggle with it. I think this is a two-man job. So here's a quick photo showing the gearbox and the bolt holes, just that we're aware of where the locations are. And those are all M12 bolts. And here's another angle showing that, and showing you the orientation, because 3 bolts go in from the other side. Right then, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to prime things so that hopefully I can get a bolt in as soon as I need to. So I'm going to try and use this little ratchet device here, which will just make it a little bit easier for me to spin a bolt in by hand, because if I'm got a gearbox hanging in the air. Now this was my idea to try and make a transmission cradle, and it failed miserably. It did not work. So this was my thinking, using 4 G clamps, and then carefully put the gearbox onto there, and hopefully those G clamps would hold that gearbox in position and stop it falling off. Now last time I did use what I called a paranoia strap, which was just a strap to stop the gearbox falling onto the floor, and in hindsight I probably should have done the same again. So being rather optimistic, I thought I could just lift this up like so, line it up, which should all be quite nice and easy, and then just push the gearbox input shaft inside the clutch. And nope, it started to fall off the jack. That was a little bit of a disaster. I'm now wondering whether to just lie on my back with the gearbox on my belly and lift it up into position, after watching a chap on YouTube who seems to do a lot of clutches, and that's his chosen method. So I'm thinking, will that work? Though he's probably a bit fitter than I am. Okay then, plan B, just lie down and push it up into position. Okay then, so let's get some leather gloves on. Probably should have kept my mats there now, so I've pulled my mats away. Right then, here goes.
That's heavy.
Okay, so first thing I've noticed, it's very heavy.
Straight.
So get on your belly.
Oh my.
Yeah, you can do this.
Flip. That's heavy.
It's just a bit of weightlifting. Just push it up and push it on. Okay. Right, so these are very heavy. So just be aware of that if you do try this way. It's not that easy. Now what I did find was there's a coolant pipe that seems to keep getting in the way and stopped me from just pushing this in. So just be aware of that coolant pipe.
Bloody on there or not?
So I'm banging away, but it's not going on. I wish I'd just taken that coolant pipe away, drained the system.
Flip. lift these? Oh, straight.
Come on. Chap on YouTube lifts them all the time. I think he does 2 or 3 clutches a day. And I suppose he's used to it. And then some of the gearboxes would be bigger than a mini one.
Oh, flip.
Okay. So we're having a little break now. That's a bit heavier than I realised.
Well, why didn't it just go in? Oh, it's water pipe, isn't it? It's that water pipe. It's in the way, isn't it? You're pushing on that water pipe.
So as you can tell, the water pipe was somewhat annoying me. And it did seem to stop the top of the gearbox just slotting in.
Right. So you're just going to have to try and push that water pipe out the way.
Yeah, let's just go for it. Come on.
Right. Where's the top? That's the top.
To be honest, I think I'd find it easy just to take the engine out and change the gearbox that way. This seemed a lot of work.
It shows that water pipe pushing it out the way.
Or at least have 2 people there just to try and locate this.
I don't know if it's on or not.
I think it's nearly on.
Straight, it's on. Flip.
So just hold it there with your leg and get a bolt
Where's
in.
the bolt? Where's the bolt?
Yeah, quick, get a bolt in. The sooner you bolt it in, the better.
I need that bolt in there. Get one in there.
Okay, so that's a 15mm socket for the bolts. It does seem quite dangerous having a gearbox just hanging over your face.
This all day. Straight. That is so dangerous.
So my hat really does go off to that chap. Like I say, he works in the rain, cold, all weathers, and just does this day in, day out. Pretty impressive stuff. So all the bolts are 15mm.
It's hard. It's hard.
So now the gearbox at least is safe and it's not going to fall on the floor.
Is it?
So I can't get those bolts in quick enough really.
Right.
I can then relax. No, they're in. And that one again was awkward because of that water pipe. And then we've got one at the back here. Just get that one home. And then there's obviously 2 for the starter motor. So these are tightened up to 85 Newton meters. Like so. And that engine does swing around quite a bit. Doesn't feel very safe going under that. There we go. So we've got another one down there. So it's not very easy with all the framework in position. After taking the engine out of the Silver Mini, I think I'd prefer just take the engine out. Seems a lot easier and safer. But anyway, right then. So now for the gearbox to the body mounting. So I'll just include a couple of photos here of the mounting when it was on the car. And there's all the different bolt fixtures. Now just be aware that that single bolt underneath, best make sure that's tight if you've loosened it or removed the bracket prior. Right then, so there's our gearbox bracket that we need to just pop on there. Like I say, space is a little bit more cramped with that engine support beam above. And obviously things are out of alignment. So you don't want to force any of the screws. So this is a 13mm socket for these 4 bolts, and you might need to just try and push on the engine, or have a second person perhaps just push underneath on the sump just to try and get things lined up, so you can at least get that bracket basically into position. Now I found I need to just try and tilt the engine slightly to try and get things to line up, because like I say, you don't want to force any of those bolts for fear of cross threading them. And then once those are in, we can actually try and align the engine for that single bolt that goes between the bracket on the gearbox and the bracket on the car's body. Right then, so, and I actually took that bracket off, the one that's on the car body, and then realised afterwards I hadn't tightened the bolts up. Hence I say, if you did remove that bracket that's on the car body, make sure you fit it and torque it before putting this bracket on, because the edge of it will cover that one single bolt up. So those are all in now and snugged up. So now it's just a case of trying to line things for that single bolt. Now when the subframe's on the car, obviously the engine's slightly pulled backwards or forwards. I can't remember which way it goes, but it's pulled and tilted slightly. So it can be a little bit of a game trying to get this bolt all the way through. But after a bit of sort of fettling, gradually got there in the end. So this one's put in with a 16mm socket. So at least the gearbox and everything else is now secure and shouldn't fall down. So now we can safely remove the engine beam and torque those mounting bolts. Okay, so we can now remove all this metal work, which will give us much better access for the final torquing of the bolts. So this one is actually quite heavy, so because you've got that extra bar as well, obviously could have taken that bar off just to make things a bit lighter. Right, so the G clamps are off, so it should be a case of just very carefully lifting this away and popping it to one side. Okay, and then we need to tighten those 4 bolts to 38 Newton meters on top of the gearbox, so they're not too tight. So make sure you don't get them confused with the other bolts, which are tightened a lot more. Right, so that's those 4, and then we can go on to the single bolt, which is 68 Newton meters. Get that tightened. And the other ones on the engine are also on the bodywork at 68, I believe. So because I removed the fuse box, I'm just going to pop that back in with a 10mm socket, like so. And then we should be able to just take the jack away, and everything should be hunky-dory without anything falling down. Okay then, to refit the little flywheel cover plate now. So for this we just got 2 bolts there, and they're only tightened to 9 Newton meters. So this seems to just cover the flywheel like so, and that's a 10mm socket. And this is the piece that was missing on my Severn Mini. Obviously it protects anything from getting in there and hitting the teeth of the flywheel. So 9 Newton meters, just pop those in, torque that up. That's that job done. So now we can refit the drive shafts. Okay, so back under the car now, with that engine just sort of hanging, which is not very comforting. So I'm just going to take the 3 bolts out, which I popped in there so I didn't lose them. So we start with the right hand drive shaft. So I'll just release it from the straps, like so. So that's our intermediate bearing, which you need to make sure lines up, otherwise you'll have a bit of a problem trying to rotate that into position. So what I'm going to do is just put a little bit of rubber grease on the end of that, I'm not sure if you should, but I'm thinking it might just help it ease into the gearbox. Okay, so lining that bearing up with the back of the engine, and being very, very careful not to damage the seal on the gearbox. Slide that in. So I'm just trying to line that bearing up now, and at the same time just push it carefully into the gearbox. Might need to just rotate the drive shaft. There we go. So that one's in. We just need to pop the 3 bolts back in, so that's a 13mm socket, like so, and then we can torque those to 25 Newton meters. Still winding that one in. Here we go. There we go, 2, and the last one. Right, so then on to the left hand drive shaft. Now you do need to note there's a little metal like circlip or spring clip on the end, which technically needs to be replaced. So I'll just try and show you that spring. There it is on the very end, and that should be replaced according to the Mini manual. But anyway, so I'm going to put again a bit of red rubber grease on there just to help this slide back in and hopefully not cause any damage to the oil seals that are on the edge. Then it's just a case of gradually push that backwards and very carefully line it up like so. And then what you need to do is line it up, just try and rotate it slightly so it engages, and then give it a slight tap like that, and that should now be in. So that's all looking good. So we've got just to put some ancillary components back on and the subframe. So I'll conclude here with some reference photographs which you can pause to view for longer. So here's a previous photo showing the clutch, and this is the protruding side where the springs are definitely more proud. And this one was just a photo showing the measurement of the clutch to ensure that it was still serviceable, which this one was because it had just over 1 millimetre of material still left. And then in this photo we can see all the different parts of the clutch and the damper springs, which are basically springs inside springs. And then this photo shows the tightening sequence and the centering mandrel that is used to line the diaphragm spring to the clutch. And here's a previous photo showing the different parts of the inside of the bell housing of the gearbox. And then this one shows the clutch release arm and the point at the bottom where the slave cylinder makes contact. And then this one shows the diaphragm spring in blue on the cover plate. And this one basically shows the 8 bolts that hold the flywheel on, and they are tightened to about 80 Newton meters. And here's those 6 female Torx E8 bolts that hold the pressure plate on. And finally, a few photos showing that clutch release bearing, which probably I should have changed. So you've been watching refitting the gearbox and clutch on a Mini R50, and thank you for watching, and I hope this video helps you refit your gearbox and clutch on your car. This video was filmed and edited by me, Mark Savage, in November 2021, and I can be found on Instagram and Facebook under Coats and Gators.